Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, the podcast where we make sense of the major debates shaping online speech, platform power, content moderation, and the future of the internet. It's June 25th, 2026, and this week we've got a special episode of Ctrl-Alt-Speech, the sparkling, brand new, no expense spared Ctrl-Alt-Speech reading list.
Woo!
Hey, this is an exclusive episode for Patreon supporters, so this is a great chance to become a supporter of Ctrl-Alt-Speech if you haven't already, but we've also got a preview on the free feeds if you are tuning in and haven't signed up yet. Ctrl-Alt-Speech is the tiny personal reading group of Mike Masnick, founder and editor of TechDirt, and me, Ben Whitelaw, founder and editor of Everything Moderation. Mike, we do this every week. It's basically a reading group, right?
Sure, a kind of reading group. I think this will be a little bit more longer form. Not in terms of listening. This episode should be shorter. If you're listening on the free feed, you're just getting the preview version, but even the full version, I think, will be a little bit shorter than our regular episodes. But we are talking about longer form content to read.
Yeah. And also, the thing about this reading group is that there's one of us is the annoying reading group person. of which there is always one in every reading group. I've been in a couple, but if you ask anybody who's been in a reading group, there is always somebody who is incredibly annoying, probably because they become overly prepared and want to speak at length. So yeah, one of us is that person. I don't know who.
We'll find out, won't we?
Yeah, exactly. So this episode is a response to various folks who have come to us wanting to understand in a bit more depth internet regulation, online speech, and trust and safety. The trust and safety industry is having many people come into it for lots of reasons that we can go into. So we're seeing an influx, Mike, of people who are new to the space, who haven't been following it anywhere near as long as you have, and even partly as long as I have. And so today we're kind of sharing books that we think are essential to read to get an understanding of the space, what's been happening over the last 20 plus years on the internet, and where it's also going. And so we've picked 3 books each today that we think are good places to start. These are the books we return most to, that we think about a lot. We could have picked a whole bunch more. It was an incredibly hard task, right?
Yeah, there are so many books. As I was putting together sort of my list, I thought it would be obvious. And then I was like, oh, wait, but also. And so I have a very long list, but we're not doing all of that. We're narrowing it down to just 3.
And if you have ideas, listeners, for books that we should be reading, or if we should do a future episode of a reading list episode in which we talk more about books that are worth reading, get in touch with us, podcast@ctrl-alt-speech.com, or leave a comment under our Patreon post of this very episode, and we'll get back to you and talk more about it. We're not, Mike, including kind of academic papers or presentations or resources. This is purely the kind of very few books that we think are worth touching on, or that we could actually kind of spend time on. There are others, and many others, that are worth reading and taking time to read. Before we get into things, Mike, big shout out to our Ctrl-Alt-Speech Patreon backers. We've got the supporters tier who pay $10 a month to get extended episodes, and also our insiders who not only get those extended episodes, but also get to suggest stories that we cover on the podcast, and maybe receive the odd message from us, none of which are explicit, which is actually quite rare on the internet. So if that's your bag, listeners, go to patreon.com/Ctrl-Alt-Speech, or go to the show notes and you can find out more. Okay, without further ado, Mike, I think it's worth us getting started. You're going to kick us off with a book that actually I haven't read. There's a few of the books that you suggested which I haven't got around to reading, and actually one that came out 15 years ago. So it's one from the annals of history.
Yeah, this is a slightly older book, but it is one, as you said, that I keep going back to, and I think is one that is really important, especially for anyone who's doing anything related to child safety on the internet. And it is Dana Boyd's book, It's Complicated. It's tough to say that because the name of the book is It's Complicated. And it's a wonderful book. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this already know of Dana's work and research and writing on various subjects related to the internet and internet communities. And it's all worthwhile. But It's Complicated is the book that I go back to quite frequently. And for a few specific reasons, mainly that she spent so much time really understanding how children were using the internet in ways that were incredibly eye-opening to me. And I sort of thought I understood some of this stuff, but I didn't until I read this. And there are a lot of books out there. And I had a few others that I included on the maybe list that I would talk about, that talk about children on the internet and communities and the way kids use the internet or the way kids should use the internet. There are a number of different books about that. And almost all of them, I think they come at it from an adult's perspective, which makes sense because it's an adult writing it. But many of them, there's a little sense of judgment in the way that they're written, right? You know, it is an adult looking at kid spaces, and whether they mean to or not, there's some element of like, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. And what always impressed me and was eye-opening to me about It's Complicated was that Dana really is incredibly empathetic and was able to talk to kids and young people and really understand in an incredibly deep and personal way how they use the internet for good and for bad. And as the title suggests, you know, the reality is complicated, that there isn't a single answer. But the things that people assume and the stereotypes and the things that people rush to about how kids and the internet interact, I think are really challenged by this book. And, you know, not in a good way or a bad way or whatever. It just really presents like, this is what kids do. This is the way kids think about things that is really powerful to me.
And what was it about 15 years ago that made this book timely? Many of our listeners will know the very recent worries about children on the internet. But do you have what was the kind of backstory as to why she took the focus on child safety back then?
I mean, I think it was certainly an understudied space. It was obviously still the early days of social media as we think of it today. There were still probably a lot more focus on like personal websites and things like that, but you had MySpace and early Facebook and things like that, but it wasn't as big an industry and there hadn't been as much thought, and there was a lot of assumptions that were being made about the kids these days and what they were doing online. But there hadn't been a really thorough or really useful study of what the kids themselves were really thinking about it and what they were experiencing. And, you know, what's interesting to me in going back and looking at it, and I've read the book a few times and I go back to it for different things at different points in time. But what's interesting to me too, is you can look at a book and say, oh, this is now out of date, right? The internet has changed and it's very different. But I don't think it is. And I think that's actually one of the things that this book has really stood the test of time. Yeah, the platforms that kids are using today have perhaps changed, and there are a whole bunch of other things happening that make some of the stuff, you know, a little bit different. But the underlying ways that kids interact and build community and want to socialize and use the internet for socialization, really, there's an underlying truth there that I still think many of the books that are coming out today miss, that Dana got right all those years ago. And so I still think it's an incredibly valuable book for anyone who's interested in this space.
Obviously, going by the title, it's kind of clear her thesis is that there's no silver bullet. It's not going to be easy to fix this problem, which even at that stage was very nascent. But does she make any kind of recommendations or predictions that we've seen either come true or not come true?
I think she might even push back on your framing of problem, right? Like, is it a problem, right? And I think there is like this instinct of lots of people to jump to the like, well, something is wrong and something needs to be fixed. And I don't think that's her thesis. I think her thesis is that kids want to communicate with other people and they have different ways in which they do that. And there's a whole bunch of different trade-offs and challenges in how they communicate. That has always been true, and it's intermediated by technology in interesting ways. But understanding the kid's point of view and how they think about these things is really important. And yeah, you know, as different generations come up, there's some different challenges, but I still think that the core underlying thesis in the book of how kids view communicating with others absolutely remains true and is fitting.
Interesting, yeah. Definitely one that I will have to dig into. So one of the books that I'm quite keen to discuss today, Mike, is one that's not quite as old as that, one that came out in 2019, a book by Sarah T. Roberts, which is called Behind the Screen: Content Moderation in the Shadows of Social Media. And so this is a book that I came across in the very early stages of when I started writing Everything in Moderation. I think I came across Sarah's work because she consulted on the documentary The Cleaners. I don't know if you remember that.
I almost said, like, when we were talking about doing this book list, if we were going to add movies, I would have added The Cleaners. But
yeah, I agree. And so she consulted on that, and that's a very good documentary by two German directors looking at the world of outsourced content moderation and what she called and coined commercial content moderation. Sarah is a professor and author. She was really kind of very early on in understanding and trying to shine a light on the way that platforms used labor from people in countries in often the global south to essentially kind of moderate content online and allow users the experience that we know that they have today. You know, people do not even today, I think, understand that their feeds and their messages and their various surfaces within these social platforms are in some fashion along the way augmented by work done by this invisible class of workers. And so the book kind of really shone a light on the outsourcing industry, what we often know as BPOs, business processing outsourcers. And there are very large companies who are very, very profitable, who put bums in seats and have contracts with large platforms who, some will argue, kind of exploit those people. Others will say provide a very important service. And it's a story that we have returned to over the last 2 years throughout Ctrl-Alt-Speech, Mike, in various guises. You know, Kenyan moderators facing PTSD, Ghanaian moderators who are being kind of exploited, you know, contract negotiations between groups, the growth of the industry to parts of Europe and Asia as well. It's one that has really grown as a storyline, but one that when I think about the new articles that come out every week and every month, always think back to Sarah's work. And I think it still has relevance because of the way that AI is kind of relying on human work still and human labor. Data labeling is the new content moderation in many ways, and you have people who are categorizing information, who are categorizing images, categorizing data in some form that will end up being used to train large language models for some of the biggest companies in the world. And so this idea of kind of invisible labor allowing us to have the experiences we do online is one that I think perpetuates even today, and one that I think is very relevant and very undercovered.
Yeah, I think it is really eye-opening. And I was almost going to say, you know, you sort of got past my question already of like, is that changing with the world of AI, where now AI is handling a lot more direct content moderation? But you're right that many of those people have now shifted to jobs sort of training the AI or doing things like that. Be interesting to see how that changes over time. But right now, I think we're seeing a lot of the same patterns, and which is why that book is so useful, because the underlying question of the working conditions is still a really big factor in all of this.
Yeah. In many ways, it's kind of scary, the way that people are treated in order for us to have the digital experience we have. And I remember back when I read it in 2019, 2020, I didn't have a strong idea of what was happening under the hood. And I was working within the media, working with platforms, and had a fairly good understanding how the dynamics of those platforms worked. And yet it was completely new to me. So again, it's probably not a book that gets very widely read, but I really wish it got more readers. So would encourage Ctrl-Alt-Speech listeners to take a look. So that's my first read, Mike. Your second one is one that speaks to a long-standing interest of yours. We can have a series of book recommendations without talking about Section 230. Talk us through why you picked this book by Jeff.
This special bonus episode of Ctrl-Alt-Speech is available in full to our Patreon subscribers. Join us today by visiting patreon.com/Ctrl-Alt-Speech. That's CTRL-Alt-Speech. If your organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us via our website at Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. Thanks for listening.